Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Here's a local legend from the Ottawa Valley. This is based on an account collected by local author Joan Finnegan in Witches, Ghosts, and Loup-Garous, Scary Tales from Canada's Ottawa Valley. There was a settler in the valley around Malakoff, now Goulbourn-Nepean, though some place this in Torbolton, back in the mid-1800s, by the name of John Goth. In those days, the majority of the valley was bushland. The timber industry the valley is known for was just starting, as before that most settlement in Ontario was further south. This was hinterland, and it was hinterland full of wolves and bears. John Goth was well known locally for a few things. He could cut and split 3 cords of wood in a day, and they say he was one of the best step dancers in the valley. The Ottawa Valley has a long tradition of Irish step dancing. It's even practiced in some Franco-Ontarian families in the region. They say that on his 90th birthday, he jumped up and step danced on a fence post. Now, when he was a young man, he had 2 big farm collies, Blackie and Whitey. These were perfect guard dogs. They could hear a toad croak a mile away. A group of Sidhe folk dancing on a pumpkin at Samhain. Hell, they could, and given what I know about the valley, probably did. Hear a bean Sidhe wail 10 miles away. Like all good guard dogs, John Goth kept his outside at night. It was late one fall evening in late October when John Goth of Malakoff heard his collies scratching and whining to get in the kitchen door. Strange behavior, as the dogs were accustomed to being left outside. He opened the door, and they ran in to hide under the table where he and his wife often took their afternoon tea. Through the open door, he could hear wolves howling. Not off in the distance, like one often hears in the valley on those kinds of nights, but close by near his barn. This was a howling the likes of which he'd never heard in his life. At this, John Goth woke his farmhand, Malcolm Hamilton. The two quickly changed into their work clothes, grabbed lanterns and rifles, and headed towards the barn. The howling was deafening, as though they were being invaded by an army of wolves on the prowl. It was like nothing he had heard on earth before. As they crossed the barnyard, the howling grew louder, and they could see many dark forms, skirting beyond the light of their lanterns, with even more shadows behind them. There must have been hundreds of them, and the howling was so loud neither man could hear the chattering of his own teeth. Losing his cool, John Goth of Malakoff opened fire in the direction of the wolves. Not a single wolf fell. His farmhand, Malcolm Hamilton, also fired into the howling mass of wolves. Again, not a single one fell. Instead, the howling miasma of wolven shadows ran off beyond the barn, towards the back of his lot, where John Goth kept a deep forest of white pine. One after another, like stampeding horses, the lupine miasma fled into the woods. There they howled all night, sometimes all in one voice, sometimes calling out to one another. John Goth and Malcolm Hamilton kept watch at his kitchen all night long, listening to the otherworldly call of that spectral Ulven legion. It is said that John Goth said to Malcolm Hamilton, "I have heard the wolves at night call out to one another, and I know that each one has a different call with a different meaning. But I have never heard anything like this before in all my livelong life." Malcolm replied to him, "Yes, I have seen packs of wolves in the shining tree country, and at the headwaters of the Bonnechere, deep in the district of Temiskaming, and in the far-off source of the Ottawa River. But I have never seen packs of hundreds of wolves running and howling together." The sun finally rose, and the howling stopped. John Goth's pine forest was quiet. The 2 tired men opened the door and looked out. To their dismay, the great army of wolves was still gathered in the woods. 3 massive wolves stood upon a fallen log at the edge of the pine stand. They were looking down into the rest of the pack. All day long, the wolves sat there, resting, watching, waiting, and plotting their next move. With loaded guns, John Goth of Malakoff and his farmhand, Malcolm Hamilton, went to the barns and did their daily farm work, secured the animals safely in the barn, and returned home. As night fell, they relit their lamps, and the lupine legion once again began to howl that wild chorus of wolf cries, ululations that had sent tremors down the spine of even the bravest man in the valley, which at the time was Joseph Jos Montferrand, known to the Anglophones as Big Joe Mufferaw. The moon was full, and as John Goth of Malakoff and his farmhand Malcolm Hamilton watched from the kitchen window, the wolves stopped howling. One after another, the wolves began to run. So many it was impossible to count. They ran out of the white pine forest and passed by the two men sitting at the kitchen window, disappearing into the moonlight and leaving Malakoff forever. They say that not a single wolf has been seen in Malakoff, Ontario since those days. But I can attest then, on certain nights of the year, especially towards the end of October, that the spectral legion of hellhounds is not shy about making themselves known. Don't worry, he lived to be 102, continued to chop and split 3 cords of wood a day, and was always an able step dancer. But he always turned dour when his family would ask him about the wolves he and his farmhand encountered that strange October night in Malakoff, Ontario. Another from the valley, the frozen ghosts of Point Fortune. A long time ago, when the only real way to get around this part of Canada was through the rivers, a wealthy colonel by the name of John MacDonald had retired from the Hudson's Bay Company as a wealthy fur trader and built himself a nice mansion on the Ottawa River at Point Fortune, about halfway to Montreal. He was a kind and generous man, with a very good sense of hospitality. He was known to entertain his neighbors from both the Ontario and Quebec sides of the river, as well as foreign dignitaries from Europe. Naturally, being Scotch, he loved to put on a grand feast for November 30th, St. Andrew's Night. Every year at his invitation, a crowd of French Canadians from the Quebec side of the river would cross the river to join the singing, dancing, and drinking, required to honor the patron saint of Scotland. One year, they kept the party going much longer than normal. It wasn't until the wee hours of the morning that the Scots of the Ontario side decided to row their habitant friends back across the river in a big, flat-bottomed barge. All the French Canadians, their wives, several of their young Scottish hosts, their booze, and even a bagpiper all loaded themselves on board. The Scots sang Auld Lang Syne to their francophone neighbors on the Quebec side, and then started back towards home. Now, as sometimes happens in the Ottawa Valley in late November, the temperature dropped drastically in a few hours. The Scots, still warmed and perhaps dulled by their fine Scotch whiskies, were oblivious to the encroaching ice. But once their barge got caught in the ice, the sobering reality of their situation caught up to them very fast. The Scots, not dressed for the cold, set all the remaining booze in the middle of the boat, asked their piper to play his merriest tunes, and resumed singing and dancing as though tomorrow were another day. Now the legend says that around freeze-up time on the Ottawa River, near Point Fortune, you can hear the echoes of the singers, the dancers, and the piper as they celebrate St. Andrew's Day. But towards dawn, all becomes silent. My father used to be a member of the Nepean Sailing Club and took part in races up and down the Ottawa River. One night, he and his captain found themselves up around Point Fortune, and they swore up and down that they heard bagpipes playing in the middle of the river. Not a piper in sight.
Ottawa Valley Stalker here. When talking about paranormal spooks in Ontario, most people focus on the area around the Greater Toronto area. Not without reason. There is a vile vortex around that God's forsaken patch of dirt, or northern Ontario. The amount of abandoned villages up the valley that were left desolate when plans to build rail lines were canned are one thing. There's also the large presence of Irish settlers, the biggest in Canada, which have left us stories of Sidhe, fairies, haunting the woods and rivers and sacred wells. There are the Polish Kashubs up around Wilno who claim a vampire stalks the woods around the Madawaska. If you're vampire hunting in the area, be sure to stop in town for some Kashubian sausage, best in Canada. Wendigos on the Quebec side of the valley, old wives' tales like the thronging spirits of Ghost Hill, the ghostly Highlanders of Point Fortune, the spectral wolves of Malakoff, the witch of Plum Hollow, who was consulted by our first 3 prime ministers who sought auguries from her, the witch coven of Eardley, etc. I'm not going to tell you about those today. Today, I'm going to tell you about the city folk of Mount St. Pat. First, some background. Mount St. Patrick was so named when the area at the foot of the mountain is a stretch, it's a very tall hill, was settled by one Father McCormack in 1869. He built a church and cemetery there, both of which still exist today. It wasn't that long ago after all. It is said that he found a spring in the area, and from that he built a well. This is the Holy Well on Holy Well Road, Pick related. Now, what isn't well known is the fact that during the Mackenzie King administration, the well was reconsecrated to the goddess Sulis by a group of neo-druids returning from the Second World War. Word is that one of the pictures of the Virgin Mary inside the well is actually a depiction of Sulis, and the Christians who draw well from the water are none the wiser. Having heard this, I convinced a group of friends to stop by on the way to our yearly camping trip. It was a bit out of the way. We usually bushwhack into the lake system just west of Calabogie. It was about 3 p.m. when we got out of my friend Johann's SUV to take a look at the well. I went inside and made an offering of 9 loonies and asked Sulis to protect us on our journey and to attract fish to our lines. I had a fierce hankering for a shore lunch, yak no bud, and I took one of the bottles of well water available for free. Now there are local legends about leprechauns in the area. I can't rightly say if my prior knowledge of this brought this feeling on or not, but on my way back to my buddy's SUV, out of the corner of my eye, in the trees by the creek near the well. Constant Creek, which ironically Father McCormack drowned in while trying to collect water. Perhaps he was pushed by an angry seedy spirit. I couldn't quite make it out, but it was maybe 3 feet tall. Hard to say, it was more of an impression in the corner of my eye than anything else. I brushed it off and we set out for Calabogie. On the way, the 4 of us, myself, Johann, Zach and Tony, enjoyed catching up. We've known each other since high school and we don't see each other as much as we used to, so we spent the drive catching up, talking shit, the kind of thing anyone does with old friends. We end up not going the way we usually do and find an old logging road we use to get into the bushwhack for about 20 minutes until we come to a lake called Fox Lake, northeast of Ashby Lake, for those with cottages in the area. We pitch our tents, get the brews out. Zach immediately casts a line and starts hacking darts. I join him, though instead of hacking darts, I crack open a Vimy micro brew. For the next several hours, we all fish while Tony does some whittling and Johann takes a nap. The whole time I feel like we're being watched. I mention it to Zach, but he tells me to never mind. We managed to catch 4 trout and a couple of bass, thanks Sulis. We let most of them go, but cooked the trout. It's getting dark now, a bit late for a shore lunch, so we have a shore supper. Bit of lemon, some salt, and La Grilled Montreal chicken spice. Absolutely perfect. The whole time, I can't shake that feeling though. It's getting dark, so I join Tony to go collect some firewood. Tons in the area. At some point we come to a little stream. Tony's off somewhere behind me getting wood. I crouch down, cup my hands, and take a drink of the water. It's nice, cool, sweet. I've got a water bottle on me, but who cares? A snapped twig catches my attention. Tone? Nothing. I look around and my friend is nowhere to be seen. It's twilight now. The crimson-amber rays of the sun filter through the trees, and an albino crow lands on a tree branch not too far from where I am. Fuck, bud. This is getting weird. I turn around to get back to camp when suddenly I see a couple of tiny little figures skirting around behind trees. I can hear laughter. What the hell is going on? The hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. Why do I feel like prey to a bunch of midgets? I start running. I know. Great way to get lost. I try to follow the shoreline back to camp, but if any of you have been along the shores of these isolated lakes, it's hard to do because they're full of thickets and brush. At some point I trip, or at least I think I tripped. Something might have pushed me. I can hear the scurrying of little feet. At this point I pull out the bottle of Sulis water and start spraying it all over as I shout in the name of Sulis of the waters, "I command you to leave me be. I mean you no harm." Now this is going to sound like some schizo shit, but I swear on my ancestors' honor this happened. A bright light shone before my eyes, and I swear I could see the image of a woman crowned with a crescent moon. The next thing I knew, I came to the sound of my friends calling my name. I called back. Johan finds me and helps me up. There is a pile of kindling neatly arranged next to me. It's not the kindling I collected. Rest of the camping trip went great. A feeling of levity, warmth, and camaraderie permeated the entire weekend. Not the most exciting story, but there it is. When I'm in the area, I always make sure to leave an offering for Sulis as thanks for letting the IOC know that I mean them no harm.
This is one of many versions of the Oneida creation story. The Iroquois people all have their own similar yet different version of how creation started. Long ago, before there was any land here, there was water all over. The only things were the creatures that lived in the water, and the birds that flew above the waters. Now further above there was land which was called the sky world, and there were beings living there, and these beings had supernatural powers. In the middle of the land was a great tree which gave them their light. There were many different things that grew on the tree. This is where they retrieved things to sustain their lives. Now it was that no one could cut into the tree, or a great punishment would be given to that person, whoever was caught harming the tree. There was this couple, and the young woman was to have a baby. This woman started to crave things, and one of the things she craved was the roots and bark from the tree, so she asked her husband to go and gather this for her. He was afraid to get these items because he would surely be punished. He waited for the people to go from the tree. As they all left, he went over and started digging. As he was digging by the tree, suddenly the ground caved in and it left a big hole. The man got very scared of what had happened, so he went back and told his wife. She asked if he got what she had wanted. He told her he did not because he had gotten so scared. She was very upset and said she would get it herself. As she arrived at the tree, she saw the hole and went over to get a closer look. As she was looking through, she saw all the water down below. She did not know that her husband followed her. As she was looking through the hole, she slipped and fell. As she was falling, she tried to grab hold of something so she would not fall. All she could grab was some of the ground and roots of the tree, but she could not hold on and she fell through. As she fell, the birds and water animals saw the light through the hole and they could see something falling. The birds were appointed to see what was falling, and they found that it was a woman from the sky world. They sent one of the birds back down to the water animals to see which one of them would be able to support her upon their backs. After they talked amongst themselves to see who would be able to support her, they turned to the great turtle and she agreed to support the woman. The birds went up to bring the woman down safely and placed her on the turtle's back. As the woman was falling, she got very frightened and fainted. She awoke on the turtle's back and all she saw was water, the birds and the water animals. She asked where she was and the animals told her that she fell through a hole and they put her on the turtle's back. She looked to where they had pointed and to see the light shining through the hole. She asked the animals if they knew where there would be any mud or dirt, so she could mix it with the medicine she had grabbed as she fell through the hole. Some of the animals said they were not sure, but there might be some at the bottom of the water. Then the woman began to gather things, for she was getting ready to give birth to a child. As the time came, she gave birth to a girl and she was very happy. The woman and her daughter walked about the earth, and she taught her about the different things that grew and what they were used for. As the days and years went by, the young girl grew to womanhood and she was very beautiful. As she was walking far from her mother, there was a man that appeared before her. The girl became terrified at seeing this man and she fainted. As she came to, she noticed that there were these 2 arrows on her stomach. One had a sharp point on it and the other was dull. She took them home with her. She told her mother of this man that she had seen and of the 2 arrows he had left behind. Her mother explained to her that they were from Sky World, and that the man that came to her was the West Wind, and that she would have 2 children. Each arrow represented one of the 2 children. As the days went by, the young woman did not feel too good, because there was a great commotion within her body. When it was finally time to give birth, the right-handed twin came out first in the natural way, while the left-handed twin had seen light coming from her mouth and wanted to go that way. As he went that way, he came out her side by her armpit, and it killed their mother. Right away, the left-handed twin spoke up and said it was the right-handed twin that killed their mother. Then the right-handed twin spoke up and explained to their grandmother what had happened. He told her that he and his brother were arguing about who was going to be born first. The right-handed twin told his grandmother that he was going to be born the way all children are born, and his brother said he was going any way he wanted to, and he came out of their mother's armpit, and that is what killed her. But the grandmother did not believe the right-handed twin and took the side of the left-handed twin. She told the right-handed twin as part of his punishment he had to bury their mother, and angrily, he started to bury his mother. As he finished, there immediately grew corn, squash, and Indian tobacco. After the right-handed twin buried his mother, he tried to go back to his grandmother, but she told him not to come back anymore. He got furious and killed his grandmother with an axe. He cut off her head and threw it to the sky, and it became the moon. He chopped up her body and threw it to the sky, and they became the stars. The only time that the grandmother was allowed to come out was during the night, the time of the left-handed twin. Now, as the right-handed twin was going around, he was creating different plants that could be used as food and also different kinds of trees. Some were tall and straight, some big and wide, and he gave them different uses. And his brother would go around changing the edible plants by making them smell awful. He would give the tall trees rough bark and the big ones small and stout with sharp thorns. Then the right-handed twin started to create different animals, small ones and big ones. These animals would eat the plants to help them grow. Then the left-handed twin came around and made animals that would eat the other animals that his brother had created. Then the right-handed twin made different areas where the waters would flow. He made streams, rivers, springs, lakes, and the big oceans. Some of the rivers he made, the water currents flowed in both directions, and the springs with sweet-tasting water. Then the left-handed twin came by and made the rivers have rough and jagged rocks that caused the rivers to have very rough rapids. Some of the springs breathed poison and heat, which made them smell very bad. As the right-handed twin finished with the waters, he went to the different birds and gave them beautiful colored feathers and songs that they could sing. Soon, the left-handed twin came and saw the birds. He changed some of the birds and the songs they sang. Later, the right-handed twin went back to look at all the things that he had created. He noticed the other different things in his creations and knew he didn't create those things. He looked at everything he made and saw the changes. This made him very angry, and he set out to look for his brother. Soon he found him by the ocean, and the right-handed twin spoke very sternly to his brother and told him that he had no right changing the things that he had created. The left-handed twin replied to his brother and said that he wanted to create things too. He shouldn't be the only one to be creating things. So the right-handed twin said that it was time that they decided who would be the creator of all the things on Turtle Island. They decided that they would challenge each other with a game of lacrosse. So the right-handed twin appointed the sun, who was to be known as the elder brother. When the sun would rise in the east, the game would start, and when it went down in the west, the game would end. So they agreed and went their own way to get ready for the game. When the sun rose from the east, they began to play lacrosse, and they became very rough with each other. When the sun set in the west, the game stopped, but neither one of them had won the game. So they said they would play the peach stone game when the sun came up from the east and end when the sun set in the west. When the sun rose, they began to play. It was going back and forth, but when the sun set in the west, still no one had won. Then they said that they would think of something when the sun rose from the east. When it did rise, the left-handed twin said the only way that anyone was going to be creator of all things was that one of them would have to die. They began to fight, but it was still even. No one was winning. They went to reach for something to kill the other with. The right-handed twin reached for the deer antlers, and the left-handed twin reached for an old stick. As this happened, the right-handed twin knocked out his brother. The right-handed twin thought he had killed his brother, so he made a raft and set him on it and put him out to sea. Then the right-handed twin was considered the creator of all things. He was called the holder of the sky. The left-handed twin was called Flint because of his rigidness. The left-handed twin was not killed. He survived and established new land across the ocean and created his own things, the things he liked.
When I was young, I lived in a run-down old house near Plum Hollow. At night, sometimes I'd go out into the woods and see reddish-orange glowing in the distance, always around 5 feet off the ground. When I got within 10 to 15 feet of them, they'd suddenly blink out. I researched a bit to see if it was a luminous bug or something, but I didn't find anything that convinced me it was a natural phenomenon. When I told my mom, she said it was Mother Barnes, the witch of a Plum Hollow, lighting candles for the travelers who came to have their fortunes read. I've lived away from Plum Hollow for a long time now, but I still remember the lights and the story vividly.
We lived on my grandfather's property in the early 1970s. He had about 75 acres in southern Ontario, Canada, near French River Provincial Park. On the property was a swamp. We hunted bullfrogs in the summer. There was also a beaver meadow that gave us an eerie feeling as if we shouldn't be there. Many times there were no sounds in that area, almost a dead zone. Occasionally we heard a knocking wood sound, but at the time it was not a thing that we knew about Bigfoot. We didn't know creatures would do that. My grandfather had an old sap shanty along the meadow that was in disrepair, and it had started to shift and fall over. The weird feelings that we got when we were there were creepy. One night, 5 of my friends and I were taunting each other to ride our mini bikes back to the beaver meadow in the dark. I was lucky enough not to need an excuse to participate as my headlight wasn't working. Then we noticed a small but bright light coming from the beaver meadow, and it hovered about 40 feet off the ground. It didn't move until all of us were looking at it. It suddenly veered to the left, fast enough to leave a light streak like a sparkler when you swing it around. Then it stopped. Then it would start again for a few seconds. Then it would stop. This continued for about 10 minutes until it started to expand and change its shape. It was not saucer-shaped nor egg-shaped. It was more oblong. No lights were flashing, and the whole craft gave off a bright white light. As we watched, it seemed to grow ever so slightly, so slow that it took a few seconds for us to realize it was moving towards us. The area it had come up out of was about a quarter mile away from us. There was nothing in the field to impede our view. It was a cool night and no insects were making a sound. At about 50 or so meters from us, we saw it clearly. It was bright white with no windows or external markings. The closer it came, the clearer we could see what looked like a single object emitting a light that seemed to create a circle directly under it. It never sped up or slowed down until it hovered directly over our small group. It stopped without any sound and stayed in place for what seemed to have been a minute or two. We could see it was around 10 meters above us. It didn't spin or hum, it just hovered. We didn't feel any movement of air, no heat or any other sensation, but we were in awe at what we were witnessing. Then suddenly, it took off straight up and blended into a pinpoint of light among the sea of stars above us. We stood around for about an hour or so trying to figure out what we had just seen. Just before we were ready to leave for the night, we started to hear the wood knocking coming from the woods along the beaver meadow. Frankly, it scared us. We quickly got on our motorbikes and hauled our asses out of there. The next summer, 3 of us were near the beaver meadow one early evening. As the light started to fade, we again observed a very bright white object hovering near the woods. Suddenly, we heard 4 distinct and loud wood knocks, which were followed by a deep growling roar. We were frozen in shock. We looked in the direction of the woods and saw several lighted objects rising out of the woods, ascending above the trees, and quickly moving up into the darkening sky. Then we heard 4 more wood knocks and crashing sounds in the woods. We quickly got out of the area. That was the last time that I ever visited the beaver meadow. My grandfather sold the property not long after that and moved to Guelph, Ontario. I never found out why he sold the property, but I do know that he did so quickly.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.